INTC 6523 Intercultural Communication Unit 2 Culture Shock, Country Shock. This lecture is based on Craig Story's The Art of Crossing Cultures, Chapter 1. Country Shock. Cultural adjustment is not the only adjustment that we have to make. Cultural adjustment is adjusting to the worldview, thought patterns, values, and behaviors of the people in our host culture. But Craig Story, in his book The Art of Crossing Cultures, talks about another adjustment we have to make, usually simultaneously with culture adjustment, called country shock. Adjustment to the country has to do with things like climate, country infrastructure, change of routines, finding our way around a new city, etc., etc. Climate, the initial adjustment to our new place of living that we have to deal with. Climate can wreak havoc on us, our bodies, our health, our lifestyle, our pocketbook, and even our mind. The heat and humidity of the tropics can be debilitating, causing one to lose energy or sleep more. A cold climate is sometimes not any easier to adjust to. We had some friends who lived in St. Petersburg, Russia, and they talked about having to adjust to 22 hours of sunlight in the summertime and almost the same number of hours in darkness in winter. Well, that would be an adjustment. Country shock, change in routine. Craig Story states, a routine is something you do while your mind is on something else, an action that you've done so many times that you no longer need to think about it in order to perform it. The lifeblood of routines is the known and the familiar. When we move to a new country and culture, all our routines get disrupted. Many times our routines are not just disrupted, but they simply no longer exist. In our new context, we have to learn new ways of doing things that previously we did without thinking. For example, the first full day that we spent in Cambodia back in 1990, I woke up in the morning, went into the kitchen to boil some water to make coffee, which I had done every day of my life up until that point. And so I went in, and then I realized I tried to plug in the hot plate, but the hot plate didn't have a plug to plug into the wall. So I couldn't boil water to make coffee because my hot plate wouldn't plug because I didn't have a plug for the hot plate. So I walked outside of the hotel where we were staying. I got into a bicycle rickshaw, and I went from market to market to market to market, and finally at the final market of the day that I went to, I found a plug. And I went back home and I put the plug on with a pair of tweezers and a pair of pliers and a kitchen knife. And I got it all fixed up and got the plug onto the hot plate, on the cord of the hot plate, and I plugged it into the wall, and it didn't work. There wasn't any electricity in the outlet. Talk about frustrating. A very simple routine that I had done for years and years and years of getting up in the morning, making coffee, boiling water, making coffee, all of a sudden was just disrupted. So in our new context, we had to learn new ways of doing things that we did without thinking. Country shock, infrastructure. In many developing countries, there is often an unreliable source of electricity. With all the technology, having a poor supply of electricity means lack of productivity. Doesn't do you much good to have a computer if you don't have electricity to run that computer or to charge the battery in that computer. Story replies, work stops, and in a word, out come the teacups. Infrastructure. In many developing countries, transportation is a major issue. Crumbling roads and bridges, old and reliable vehicles, etc. This can make traveling in country very expensive and very time consuming. I went back to Cambodia after 16 years being gone, and the roads in Cambodia were now nice, and so got in a vehicle and went from Phnom Penh, the capital city, to Battambang in less than 3 hours. And I remembered when I did that trip in 3 hours. I remembered when we lived there, how that trip took us 8 to 10 hours by car, simply because the roads were in disrepair. Sometimes the bridges were out. Uh, we had to go very, very slow. And so traveling in country was very, very slow, very time consuming, very expensive. It felt like a breeze to make that trip in 3 hours. Another chronic complaint is poor telephone service. In the United States, the telephone is like a third hand. When suddenly it's amputated, you miss it. So I remember living in India, and we went down to the phone company to make our payment to get a phone installed in our home, and they had the regular service. They had the fast track service, so we paid to get the fast track service, and that was within a couple of weeks. And so within a couple of weeks, the guy shows up at my house with the phone, plugs it in, wires it up, walks out the door. I go over to the phone, pick up the receiver, no dial tone. Come to find out, the phone company has a guy who comes in and installs the phone. They have to have someone else go in and turn the phone on, and he has to go down to the switch station and turn it on. So we go down to the switch station, and we talk to the guy who's in charge of the switch station to turn our telephone on, and of course he wasn't there. So we just went on our way, and we went away for a month to study language up in the mountains of India. Came back, our phone was working. Poor communication systems means excess time consumption in getting things done. It took us, well, basically it would have taken us 6 weeks to get a phone, but 4 of those weeks we just decided we were going to go to language school because it was just too frustrating to deal with the telephone company. Country shock, unfamiliar faces. Storty states, another reality of being in a new country is not knowing anyone. For the first few weeks after your arrival, you will be interacting day in and day out, hour by hour, with people that you don't know or don't know very well. Interacting just a couple of hours with strangers can be very, very exhausting, especially when there is language differences. A related issue is that you are no longer near family and friends, thus homesickness becomes a problem. Medical care. Another frustration is the medical care that is often substandard when compared to medical care in the West. Storty states, you might reasonably assume that expatriate talk would revolve around such issues as politics and weather, but it touches just as often on the solidity of one's stools. You can tell you're sitting around a table with a bunch of cross-cultural workers when the course of the conversation is entirely about bodily functions or bodily malfunctions. Country shop, what can you do? Expect it. Stay healthy, get plenty of rest. Keep in contact with family and friends back home, which is easier today than it was when we left back in the mid-80s. Get out of the house, meet people, do things. Get to know your country. Don't worry about getting lost. It happens. Get out of your house, meet people, do things. Don't be too rough on yourself. You're living in a new environment that is completely foreign to you, so just relax. The problem is not you. The problem is your routines are changed. You're dealing with a different kind of infrastructure. Things don't work the way that they did back home. You're having to interact with strangers all the time. The problem is not you. Just relax. You're living in a new environment that's completely foreign to you.